You notice it in small ways first. Someone asks you a question, and while you answer, their eyes drift toward the door. You finish your point in a meeting, and the room moves on as if you had said nothing at all. The conversation continues around you, through you, without ever pausing to register what you contributed. You are still speaking. People can still hear the sound of your voice, but somewhere along the way, they stopped listening. This is not dramatic. There is no confrontation, no moment where someone tells you that your words no longer matter. The shift is atmospheric. It happens in the small gap between when you finish a sentence and when someone responds, a gap that grows wider each time, filled with glances exchanged between others, with phones being checked, with the subtle reorientation of bodies towards someone else in the room. You are technically present, but you have become background texture. Your voice is registered, the way elevator music is registered, acknowledged only in its absence, mourned by no one. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote about power in terms that most people found too cold to accept, but he never mistook politeness for influence. He knew that authority erodes long before it is openly challenged. People do not gather to vote you out of relevance. They simply stop waiting for you to finish your sentences. They stop asking what you think. They stop adjusting their positions based on what you have said. The structure remains intact. You are still in the room, still part of the conversation. But the attention that once amplified your presence has been reallocated. And attention, not agreement, is the currency of influence. What most people misunderstand is that listening is not a courtesy extended to everyone equally. It is a reward granted unconsciously to those who demonstrate that their words carry weight. When you speak, people are not evaluating your ideas in isolation. They are evaluating you. They are measuring the degree of certainty behind your voice, the control you have over your own reactions, the extent to which you seem unbothered by whether they agree with you or not. These assessments happen faster than thought. They are made in the first few seconds of your speech, often before you have said anything of substance. And once the assessment is complete, the quality of attention you receive is determined. This is why two people can say nearly identical things and receive completely different responses. One person speaks, and the room leans in. Another person speaks, and the room begins to fragment, conversations splitting off into side channels, attention scattering like light through a prism. The difference is not in the content. It is in what people sense beneath the content, the emotional residue, the need, the barely concealed hope that this time finally someone will take them seriously. You lose people the moment they detect uncertainty in your voice. Not uncertainty about facts, but uncertainty about whether you should be speaking at all. It comes through in the way you over-explain simple points, as if trying to justify the space you are taking up. It comes through in the qualifiers you attach to every statement, the endless hedging that signals you are already prepared to retreat from whatever position you have taken. It comes through in the speed of your speech, the slight rush that suggests you are trying to say everything before someone interrupts, before the attention you have managed to capture slips away again. People also stop listening when they sense dependence, when your words seem designed to extract validation, to prompt reassurance, to confirm that you are still valued, still relevant, still worth acknowledging. This need is rarely stated outright, but it saturates your tone. It shapes the questions you ask, the way you circle back to points you have already made, the frequency with which you reference your own contributions, as if to remind everyone that you were there, that you said something, that it should have mattered. Dependence repels attention the way confidence attracts it. And the irony is that the more desperately you need to be heard, the less people are willing to listen. Tone communicates more than content ever could. You can say something objectively true, something useful, something that would benefit everyone in the room, and it will be ignored if your tone conveys hesitation or internal conflict. People are extraordinarily sensitive to vocal patterns. They hear the slight upward inflection at the end of your sentences, turning statements into questions. They hear the breathiness that suggests anxiety, the flatness that suggests resignation, the overmodulation that suggests performance. And each of these cues tells them that you are not certain of your own position, which means they do not need to be certain of it either. Timing matters in ways that are almost never discussed. There are people who wait too long to speak, letting the moment pass, and then try to resurrect it with a comment that no longer fits the flow of conversation. There are people who speak too quickly, jumping in before the previous speaker has fully finished, as if afraid that silence will close the door on their chance to contribute. Both errors communicate the same thing, that you are reactive, that you are governed by the rhythm of the room rather than setting it yourself. People listen to those who seem to operate on their own time, who speak when they have something to say, rather than when they feel the pressure to say something. Verbal excess is a more effective killer of attention than wrong ideas. You can be correct about everything and still train people to tune you out if you cannot stop talking. The person who explains every point 3 different ways, who adds example after example, who cannot let a silence sit without filling it. This person teaches others that their words are abundant and therefore cheap. Scarcity creates value. When you speak rarely, people begin to assume that when you do speak, it will be worth hearing. When you speak constantly, they assume the opposite, and they are usually right. In meetings, you can watch this play out in real time. There is always someone whose contributions are met with nods, with follow-up questions, with the kind of engaged silence that indicates people are actually processing what has been said. And there is always someone whose contributions are met with polite acknowledgement and then immediate redirection, as if the group is collectively agreeing to move on before any real consideration can occur. The second person often says more than the first. They often work harder to make their points clear. But they have already lost the room, not because of what they said, but because of what the room sensed about them before they began speaking. Groups rank voices unconsciously, and the criteria are never articulated. Emotional containment is one factor. People listen to those who seem unaffected by the tension in the room, who do not flinch when challenged, who can sit through disagreement without rushing to defend themselves or smooth things over. The person who remains calm while others grow agitated is granted a kind of automatic authority, even if they say very little. Their composure suggests they have access to something others do not, a perspective, a confidence, a detachment that makes their eventual words feel more considered. Verbal economy is another factor. The person who can reduce a complex issue to a single sentence, who does not need paragraphs to make a point, who trusts that their meaning will land without elaboration, this person is unconsciously elevated in the social hierarchy. Economy signals mastery. It suggests you understand the subject so thoroughly that you do not need to prove it, that you are secure enough in your position to let your words stand without reinforcement. Excess signals the opposite. It signals doubt, a lack of confidence that your point will be understood or accepted unless you bury the room in explanation. Reaction speed also plays a role, though not in the way most people assume. It is not about being the first to speak. It is about responding in a way that suggests you were not waiting to respond, that you were not sitting there rehearsing your reply while someone else was talking. The person who pauses before answering, who seems to genuinely consider what has been said before formulating their response, communicates a kind of self-possession that draws attention. The person who jumps in immediately, whose response feels preloaded, communicates desperation as if they were simply waiting for the previous speaker to stop making noise so they could insert their own. The connection to Machiavelli is direct. He believed that power is preserved not through constant assertion, but through controlled visibility. The prince who appears too often becomes ordinary. The prince who speaks too much becomes noise. Authority, in Machiavelli's framework, is something you possess by appearing to possess it, and you lose it the moment you seem to need it confirmed by others. This applies just as clearly in social settings as it does in political ones. The moment you begin seeking validation through speech, you signal that you lack the internal authority to stand without it. And once that signal is detected, the room adjusts accordingly. Consider the person who cannot let a statement stand without checking to see if others agree. Who finishes a point and then immediately adds, "Does that make sense?" Or, "Do you see what I mean?" This is not collaboration. It is a request for reassurance, a plea for confirmation that you have not wasted everyone's time. And the room hears it as such. Every time you ask for validation, you lower your own status. You train people to see you as someone who needs permission to occupy space, and people do not listen to those who seem uncertain of their right to be heard. There are small social moments that reveal this dynamic more clearly than any grand confrontation ever could. You are in a conversation with 3 or 4 other people. You make a comment. One person glances at you briefly. then looks away. Another person does not look at all. The conversation continues as if you had not spoken. No one is rude. No one tells you to be quiet. They simply do not register your contribution as something that requires a response. A few minutes later, someone else makes a similar point, phrased slightly differently, and the entire group engages with it. They ask questions. They build on it. They treat it as if it is the first time the idea has been introduced. You are still standing there. You can still hear your own voice in your head, but the room has already decided that your words do not create the same obligation to respond that someone else's words do. Or you are in a meeting. You raise a concern about a project. You explain the issue carefully, outlining the risks and the potential consequences. People nod. Someone says, "Good point," in a tone that feels like a dismissal rather than agreement. The meeting moves on. 20 minutes later, someone else raises the same concern, using almost the same language you used. This time, the room stops. People lean forward. Someone takes notes. The project lead says they will address it immediately. You are looking at the same faces that were in the room when you spoke. But when you spoke, your words did not land. When someone else spoke, they did. The difference is not the content. The difference is that the second person did not seem to need the room to take them seriously. They presented the concern as if it was obvious, as if anyone paying attention would have already noticed it, as if their role was simply to name what everyone else had already been thinking. There was no anxiety in their voice, no indication that they were worried about being dismissed. And because they did not signal fear of dismissal, the room did not dismiss them. The compulsion to keep talking is almost always driven by the fear of disappearing. You sense that if you stop speaking, you will stop existing in the awareness of others. So you fill every gap, you elaborate every point, you circle back to ideas you have already expressed, just to keep your presence alive in the conversation. But this has the opposite effect. The more you talk, the easier it is for people to stop listening. Your voice becomes a constant hum, something that can be tuned out without consequence. You become the person others wait to stop talking so the real conversation can resume. Restraint, by contrast, signals self-possession. It suggests that you do not need the room's attention to confirm your value, that you are content to let your words sit in the silence without chasing after validation. When you speak less, people begin to wonder what you are thinking. They begin to notice when you do speak, because it happens infrequently enough to register as an event rather than a continuation of noise. Restraint creates space, and in that space, attention can gather. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. His implicit rule was that those who matter do not fight for attention. They do not compete for airtime, do not scramble to make themselves heard, do not plead for consideration. They understand that influence functions more like pressure than volume. A small amount of weight applied to the right point can shift an entire structure. A large amount of noise scattered across a room accomplishes nothing except to confirm that the source of the noise is not worth listening to. Think of influence as density rather than size. A single sentence from someone who rarely speaks can carry more weight than an entire monologue from someone who cannot stop talking. The sentence does not need to be brilliant. It does not need to solve every problem or address every concern. It simply needs to land in a space where people are still capable of receiving it, where their attention has not already been exhausted by the effort of pretending to care about everything else you have said. This is why people who talk constantly wonder why no one listens to them, while people who speak sparingly are often accused of having too much influence. The frequent speaker mistakes quantity for impact. They believe that if they just explain one more time, in one more way, with one more example, people will finally understand. But understanding is not the issue. Attention is the issue. And attention is a finite resource that people allocate based on who seems least desperate to receive it. The humiliation of being ignored is not that people disagree with you. It is that they have stopped considering your words significant enough to disagree with. Disagreement requires engagement. It requires that someone take your position seriously enough to formulate a counter-argument. Being ignored means you have been categorized as someone whose opinions do not require refutation, because they do not register as a threat or a contribution, or even a meaningful presence in the room. You are still there. You are still talking. But you have been, subtly, collectively, dismissed. And once this happens, it is extremely difficult to reverse. People form impressions quickly and revise them slowly. If they have decided that you are someone who talks without saying much, someone whose contributions can be safely ignored, they will filter everything you say through that lens. Even if you make a genuinely insightful point, it will be received as an anomaly, something they might acknowledge in the moment, but will not cause them to reassess their overall perception of you. You have been placed in a category, and categories are sticky. What changes the pattern is not trying harder. It is not speaking more carefully, or more loudly, or with more conviction. What changes the pattern is withdrawing from the compulsion to be heard. It is letting silence exist without feeling responsible for filling it. It is allowing conversations to continue without your input, not as a form of punishment or withdrawal, but as a recalibration of your relationship to the room. When you stop treating your voice as something that must be constantly deployed to justify your presence, people begin to notice its absence, and absence, when it is chosen rather than imposed, creates a different kind of attention than presence ever could. This is not about manipulation. It is not about playing games or withholding your thoughts to create artificial scarcity. It is about recognizing that influence is not a product of effort. It is a product of perception, and perception is shaped by patterns that operate beneath the level of conscious thought. When you speak all the time, you train people to perceive your words as expendable. When you speak only when you have something that feels necessary to say, you train them to perceive your words as essential. The shift happens gradually. Just as the loss of attention happened gradually. You start speaking less. You let other people fill the space you used to occupy. You stop checking to see if people agree with you. Stop asking if your points make sense. Stop circling back to ideas you have already expressed. At first, nothing changes. The room continues to function exactly as it did when you were trying to force your way into every conversation. But then, slowly, people begin to notice when you do speak. They begin to turn toward you instead of away. They begin to ask what you think instead of waiting for you to tell them. This is not guaranteed. There are people who will never listen to you, regardless of how you adjust your approach. There are dynamics that are too calcified to shift, hierarchies that are too rigid to penetrate. But in most cases, the problem is not that people are incapable of listening to you. The problem is that you have trained them not to. You have signaled through the patterns of your speech that your words do not require their full attention, and they have responded accordingly. Machiavelli's deeper insight was that authority is sensed before it is heard. People decide whether to listen to you before you open your mouth. They make that decision based on how you carry yourself, how you respond to tension, how much you seem to need their approval. If you enter a room already seeking validation, already anxious about whether you will be taken seriously, people will sense that need and react to it. They will hear it in your voice, see it in your posture, feel it in the way you position yourself in relation to them, and they will grant you the level of attention they believe you have earned, which is to say, very little. But if you enter a room without that need, if you seem genuinely indifferent to whether people agree with you or even acknowledge you, something shifts. You stop being a supplicant and become a presence. You stop asking for space and simply occupy it. And people who are always unconsciously searching for signs of who holds authority in a given context begin to orient themselves toward you, not because you have demanded it, but because you have stopped needing it. The return of influence when it happens is quiet. There is no announcement, no moment where someone apologizes for not listening to you before. People simply start responding differently. They ask you questions they did not ask before. They reference things you said days or weeks ago, as if your words have stayed with them. They make space for you to speak, without you having to fight for it. The change is subtle, but it is unmistakable. You are no longer background noise. You are no longer someone people tolerate. You have become someone they wait for. And the strange thing is that you did not change what you were saying. You changed how much you were saying, and why. You stopped speaking to prove you belonged in the room, and started speaking only when you had something that felt true and necessary. You stopped trying to fill every silence and started letting silence do its work. You stopped performing certainty and started inhabiting it, not as a mask, but as a byproduct of no longer caring whether people believed you or not. People listen when they feel they might miss something if they don't. That is the mechanism. That is the law Machiavelli understood but never needed to name. Attention flows toward whatever seems scarce and self-contained, and it drains away from whatever seems abundant and needy. You cannot force people to listen to you, but you can stop giving them reasons not to. And in the space that opens, when you stop chasing their attention, you might find that it returns on its own, not as a favor, but as a recognition of something they sense in you that was not there before, or perhaps was always there, but was hidden beneath the noise of trying too hard to be heard.